All right, picking up here on what do we do? So we discussed this democratization. Democratization is ruining us. And again, there's no shortage of this, right? If you want to look, there's a lot of really great books written about this time period of the Articles of Confederation. There's a lot of analysis in history that we are largely overlooked because in our history classes we're like American Revolution to Constitution and then Civil War. And that's really, really bad. There's a lot of stuff that happens in there that we really need to pay attention to if we're going to understand America correctly. And one of them is this exchange, that America's first government failed and failed miserably, and it's going to force us to come together and do something we don't want to do. Entering into consensual relationships is not something we intuitively want to do. It's something we have to choose to do. Guys, this is something that even if you think about the marriage vows, right? I'm going to stand by your side in sickness and health till death do apart. Guys, who wants to stand by somebody sick and be like, yeah, I'll take care of you. Yeah, I'll bring you some chicken soup. Yeah, I will cancel my golf game to hang out with you. Who wants to do that? This is where my wife and I had this conversation at one point about looking at this like, she's like, I want you to want to do it. I'm like, why? Why would I ever want to do it? Like, women have this, like, I want you to want to do it. Because if you don't want to do it, I'm imposing you. I'm kind of like, I'm becoming a burden to you. And the reality is this. If you're in a relationship, are you a burden to the person you're in a relationship with? Yes! That's the whole point. The unburdened nature of the relationship requires something from you. If the relationship doesn't require something from you, it's not a relationship. So here we are, and we're saying our government, underneath the articles, it doesn't have any strength. There's no bind tying us together. There's no consistency. There's no buy-in. There's no sacrifice. And that's powerful. Because as much as I have to take my wife chicken noodle soup when she's sick, what happens when I'm diagnosed with stage 3 Hodgkin's lymphoma and she has to clean up vomit, and she does so willingly. She does so while asking me if I'm okay. Going through chemotherapy with my wife, literally, true story. We were having our 3rd kid at the time, so she was pregnant in the chemotherapy wing, and everybody kind of looked at us like, what's y'all's story? But as she was going into birth, into labor rather, with my 3rd child, I had just gone through a chemotherapy appointment, and nausea was overwhelmingly bad for me throughout the time. And so the whole time, like, she's literally pushing my son out, and she's there looking at me like, are you okay? I'm like, Ted, are you okay? You focus on you right now. Can I get you some ice chips? Like, no, I'm good. I've done this twice, right? Are you okay? I'm like, no. Are you? I'm good. But it's that notion of when you start understanding the unburdened nature of sacrifice and it's reciprocal, that's how you develop stability and balance. We have to create a nation where we give into the nation, but we also get a reciprocal benefit from what we give into the nation. So whatever taxes that we're taking, we get a reciprocal benefit from those taxes. Whatever things that we establish, we get a reciprocal benefit. So we're looking for something that becomes a balance of strength where we can sacrifice and give into it, but it remains a balance so we continue to consent without falling into rebellion. But this is not easy. And it's not something we want to do, because now we have to have 13 states put their differences aside and say, no, we have to grow on something. As if you ever want to build relationships, the beginning of it is saying, hey, we have to agree on something. What is the thing we can agree on? What is the platform, the foundation? Okay, based on that foundation, what else can we agree on? Okay, then what else? And you start building something from the ground up. Every successful relationship is going to have this. We have to agree on something. What's fascinating with the Constitution of 1787 is this is what it is. We have to agree on something. What's fascinating is this. The first thing that they do is they lay down rules. Not rules of Constitution, not rules of government. They put down rules of behavior. If this is going to be successful, we have to establish rules that are going to govern our interaction, how we're going to talk to each other while we try to figure out what we do. In my house, we have rules. You don't yell, you don't scream, you don't fight, you don't belittle. I always ask my kids, are you talking in a tone conducive to a positive outcome? And yes, even my 12-year-old asked me that question. Or are you talking in a tone that's negative, that's belittling, that's demeaning? I ask them constantly to reflect. When you look at the Founding Fathers, they actually put down rules, and some of the rules are fascinating. Some of the rules are like, if this dude is talking, you're not. You don't interrupt. Guys, simple things like that. Right, guys, this is what's fascinating when you start kind of diving into this, and this is hard as a teacher, because some of this carries a cultural expectation, and cultural expectations sometimes are tinged with racial expectations. But what I realized is, as I kind of discuss things, right, a lot of times if you go to white church, right, white church, nobody talks when anybody else is talking. There's a very clear expectation of what not. If you go to black church, it's a different phenomenon, different rules. Now, which one's right, which wrong? Because I'm not saying white church is better. White church gets boring a lot. Nobody talks anything. You're not allowed to talk. If you talk, you get in trouble. Black church, everybody talks. In fact, if you get the Spirit, you're expected to talk. Guys, some of the biggest issues between whites and blacks and Hispanics in our culture is this. We haven't started to say, okay, how do we talk? What words do we use? And we use those words, what do we mean by them? Do we respect each other to actually hear each other out and actually listen when other people are talking? Guys, we talk about like students being on their phones or device all the time. And it's a big distraction. Like students like, oh, I can multitask. No, you can't. You really can't, right? There is nothing. But when I go back and students, they're like, listen, guys, they had that. In the Constitution, it said one of the rules is if somebody's up and talking, you're paying attention. You're not even writing down or stuff. That was a rule. And they all agreed on that. Because they concede that says, if I'm talking, what do I want? I want your attention. Right? When I taught high school, it was this girl that I could not break her phone use. I just couldn't. Her grade was suffering. She got, and again, a lot of it's unconscious. A lot of it's like, oh, this is what I do, and I'm used to it. I'm kind of spacing out. And so sometimes we actually have to help students do this. And so she needed my attention after school one day. And she comes up, she's like, hey, Mr. Crosby, got a question. I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, go ahead. What's your question? She was like, well, I'm like, yep. She's like, well, Mr. Crosby. I'm like, yeah, I'm listening. I'm good. Go ahead, keep on going. Then, blah, blah, blah. Mr. Crosby, I'm good. I'm listening. I'm with you. She's like, no, you're not. You're on your phone. I'm what? She's like, well, you're on your phone. You're not listening to me. Say that again. And she was like, you're on. Guys, sometimes how we talk to each other is a very simple equation of maybe you start doing what you would want others to do. And we begin there. They begin there. If I'm talking, I would want you to listen. So if you're talking, I'm going to listen. I want you to hear my ideas. I had to realize this about being married to a woman. A lot of times, as a guy, we want to fix things. Like, I'm here to fix. Okay, let's go. Fix. Now, let's go. And I had to realize that sometimes she doesn't need me to fix it. She just needs me to shut up and listen. That's it. She just needs me to say, honor my conversation, honor my struggle, honor my thoughts with your time, with your consideration. And guys, that's powerful for communication. How many people here today, ask yourself this, if we just began here, constant convention, we have all these disagreements, all this fight, all this arguments, the 13 colonies are outright exploiting each other, and they begin with how we talk. How often in a day do you talk to somebody that you know is not listening to you? Right? You can see it. Eyes kind of spaced out. They're thinking something else. Guys, I will tell you, we've gotten so used to Americans of thinking we can multitask, which we can't. I'll tell you right now, we've overwhelmingly proven that you cannot multitask. Right? Your brain has to jump back and forth, and it has to focus on one of them. Right? And so when you focus over here, this input is coming in, but it's not, so it's broken and fragmented. We've gotten so used to this. Students have gotten so used to this that you actually have to physically train yourself to say, no, I'm here, I'm focused. Even when talking to my kids come up and I'm doing something on my phone, I have to literally take my phone and say, okay, wait, wait, hold on. Okay, what's up? What do you have? And a lot of it's just a respect. Let me finish this real quick. That way I can devote my time to you. Now, my time is yours. And just that little thing, practicing. Why are we doing this? Why should we do this? Well, they tell us. Why did we sacrifice ourselves to a decent respect? Why did we construct this? In order to form a more perfect union. You're alone. You're isolated. Is it good enough? Can the states go at this alone? Can we go at this alone? Are we going to be able to accomplish what we want to alone? It became overwhelmingly clear to the Founding Fathers we can't do this alone. We're actually better together. We can maximize our interests together. We can do more together than we can do apart. So in order to form something better than we have, in order to achieve something better than we can do individually, we're going to sacrifice ourselves and give of ourselves as a group in order to form a more perfect union. Establish justice. This is not a small feat for you. The Constitution is supposed to establish justice. We don't even know what that is. And before you start whining about justice, I would highly advise read the history of justice and all the different ways that we can interpret it. We don't even agree on what justice is. The most obvious example of that is Justice League, modern day superheroes. We have created this conception in the modern sense that justice is relative. You get to pick whichever superhero you want. And so you just pick your version of justice. Well, what happens if the entire nation is out there and everybody's picking their version of justice and we have no consensus on what it means? Right? Well, we have no unification. There's nothing in here. And if there's nothing in here that we agree on that is just, then we can't possibly adapt it into our collective agreement. Justice becomes something else. And what we see is that there was something in the Constitution where the Founding Fathers said, this is just. What is it? What are we supposed to defend? Ensure domestic tranquility. I like this one. As parents, got a press release coming out on my most recent book, and going on this Q&A with the person that was putting it out. And he asked me this question. He says, if you're talking to parents, what would you say is the most difficult part of being a parent? And I answered the question kind of haphazardly. I'm like, well, if I'm going to be honest, the most difficult part of being a parent is to realize that you are the greatest detriment to your child's happiness. That's the most difficult part. As parents, we want to externalize all threats. As parents, we lead ourselves to believe that the greatest threats are external. That there's a bully at school, there's a teacher, there's peanut butter. There's always something external that's going to harm our kids. And we turn a blind eye to the fact that actually, no, the most destabilizing thing in a child's life is what you do at home. Domestic peace. Peace at home. Children who are raised in two-parent homes that are reasonably stable in almost every criteria tend to do better. Almost every criteria. No matter the income or the place of the home. If I have a home where a divorce happens, I see the same tendency and struggle in the child of that home. If I see a home where somebody loses a job and the stability of that home goes away, I see that emerge in the child. Guys, even in infants, I can take a urine sample, literally, true story, biochemical analysis of their urine, because when the body is stressed, it produces a certain hormone, a certain chemical. And I can take a urine sample of a baby, and I can tell you how stressful that household is. founding father said, we're not here to win the world. We're not here to protect everybody. We're here to show the world that you can create a house of peace. So many moms out there today are out there defending their little babies of everything in the world without understanding that, no, the person hurting your kid the most is you. You. And you can see it. See it all the time. Even at well-meaning parents. Some of them just haven't thought it through. They don't actually know what they're doing. They domineer. They control. Provide for the common defense. Common defense. Secure the borders. I don't know why we have such a problem with border control, by the way. Like, I don't even know why border control is an issue. Like, literally. One of the most obvious examples of all government is secure your borders. This is politics 101. So when people are like, we don't need a wall, border control is like politics 101. And we've created nations like, no, we want open borders. Like, you don't have a politic. You don't have a group. How do you create stability in a group if everybody's coming in? I did a lesson in my high school government class. I called it my donut lesson. And there's a lot of stuff baked into this lesson. Baked, pun intended. Come on, that's a baked, anyway. All right. So what I did though is I had them separated in two groups, and I wanted them to write a law that guaranteed the equal distribution of this series of donuts. So I brought them to class, 24 donuts, I had 18 in class. So I told the class, as soon as you can give me a law, a rule, that guarantees the equal distribution of the donuts, I will then allow you to have these donuts. And I put donuts in front of high school students, like, ooh, everybody gets a donut. Nah, there's 18 of you and 24 donuts. Who gets the leftovers? Well, we'll just let those, but what if more than 6 people want those leftovers? They gonna arm wrestle for them? Also, why is it fair that everybody gets the same amount of donuts? I got a little cheerleader in the back. She's what, 120? Football player over here is 330. Why should she get as many donuts and calories the same? If I break it down to caloric intake, shouldn't we have a caloric intake based on the body mass and the requisite caloric needs of that person? What about size of donuts? What if there's a best donut? And people always like, the donuts are all the same. Like, your parents always tell you this, the donuts are all the same. They're never the same. For whatever reason, there's always a donut that looks better than all the other ones. We don't know what it is. Like, every time my kids bake, like, I make biscuits. True story. I'm an amateur chef. But when I make biscuits, and I mean like homemade, like butter southern biscuits, the best biscuits you've ever had in your life kind of biscuits, right? Yeah, like the old school slap your mama kind of biscuits. I know that. You know what I'm talking about. You're like, where do you hear that from? I know. My kids always line up, like, they always look at the sheet pan and like, that one. I went, no, that one. That one's the best one. So do we line up? Do we say, okay, whoever has the best grades, they get the first biscuits? Guys, these things are hard. And we've got to figure out how to develop equality even with 18 students in class. But here's what I do. I've already organized with other teachers in the school building. So about halfway through the lesson, about 20, 30 minutes through the lesson, I have another teacher start sending students to my class. Hey, Mr. Crosby, we heard about the donuts. We're here for the donuts. And I'm like, and my class, even like my uber liberal students are like, oh no, they're not part of our class. They're not part of our class. No, this is immigration. Welcome in. Welcome to the donut lesson. So now we have 19, not 18. And then I have 3 more trickle in. Hey, Mr. Crosby, we're here for the donuts. Like, ooh, now we have 22. 5 more trickle in. Now I have 27 and 24 donuts. Then I have 20 more come in. Even my most liberal, open, beloved student that's just going to welcome all immigrants by the end of the class is like, no, we need IDs, and if you weren't on the schedule in this class, you don't get the donut. Then I end the donut lesson like this. Since so many of you in my class, you got so possessive of those donuts, and not one of you sacrificed anything for them. You automatically assumed ownership, a right, and then you denied that ownership and right to any other human being just because you were in my class. we have the audacity to say that we understand what the government is trying to do. Secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. The United States, if nothing else, is a composite of a bunch of different people. When people look at the United States, I would argue we're going to have less agreement than most nations. Why? Because we're far more diverse. And I don't mean racial diversity, I don't mean cultural diversity, I mean we are just different. If you look at most nations on the planet, there's what we call a homogeneity about an ethic about the way that nation exists. If you look at a lot of the like we look at Switzerland and we look at Denmark, a lot of them have very similar cultural ethics. Even Canada has a stronger similarity in their cultural ethic. In America, we have different cultural ethics and a vast array depending on where you live. Like I mentioned in class, if you're New Orleans African American, that's different from Chicago African American. Right? Just like if you're New England white, that's different from Texas white. Right? You know, if I think Texas white, you're thinking cowboy boots, cowboy hat. If I say New England white, you're thinking of a completely different imagery. I can do that a lot. If I say German, image, Italian, image. And yet we have Fredericksburg, and we have Paris in Texas, by the way. Guys, what America said is we said, give me your best. Bring your best and contribute. Bring your best and sacrifice. Bring your best. And so we did. Which means we get all kinds of random stuff like Tex-Mex. Right? People are like, what is Tex-Mex? It's not Texan, it's not Mexican. Like real Mexican food is more bland. So if you actually have real Mexican food, there's actually not a lot of spice in it. If you have new Mexican food, you get a lot of the red chili peppers and whatnot. If you get Tex-Mex, we throw jalapenos and cheese and all kinds of stuff in there. It's a different ethic. So what America's trying to do is say, can we take the best of all of these different people from all of these different places and find some unification in the middle that brings out the best? And this is what we're going to try to do. The Constitution Convention is going to produce the Constitution of the United States. It's going to set up a system of federalism. We're not going to give the government full power. We're not going to go back to Hobbes. So we're not going to give this unitary system back to Hobbes. What we're going to do is we're going to strategically organize a system of balance whereby we remain independent and autonomous as a state on most issues, but then have a series of issues where we're willing to give in and sacrifice those to the federal government. In other words, we're going to have a balanced republic. Every single founding father that have looked at and analyzed with any significance is going to refer to our government as a republic, a compound republic. We needed more centralization, but we didn't want absolute centralization. We're not going to run right back to the King of England, right? We didn't want that. We wanted something else. And so this is going to create a really unique system. A system that I don't think many Americans understand, a system that we really are struggling with today, and the system produces essentially layers of government compounded upon itself, upon which you are a consensual member of each layer. So here's what it looks like. You, the individual, are going to be simultaneously part of a federal government. That federal government is simultaneously in charge of all people in the United States, including you. So anything that happens in the federal government is going to happen to all Americans, of which you're a part. However, the specific power we gave that government is limited. So if we do this, and I'll have this on the board, if you conceive of all of the power that you have, political power that you can possess, what we did is we said, we're going to give this much power and authority to the federal government. And so the federal government can organize that part of our lives. Well, what happened to all the power we didn't give the federal government, that we denied the federal government? Well, underneath this model, you have the states. And the states have, every state has its own constitution. And there's an exchange where individuals in each state exchange with the state a power balance as well, where we pay taxes in the state of Texas and we get certain benefits from that state in return. And in this agreement, all 50 states are going to have a different contractual agreement with their state. different from this one. Now, anything that we give here, this constitutes all 50 states. Anything that happens here could change by state. So something that's illegal in Texas may not be illegal in New Orleans, right? Roads that may have legitimacy in Texas may be changed in Louisiana, right? So when we start looking at this, that's the state. But there's still a lot of power over here. I need that blue, there we go. So now I have this other power, and this is going to really kind of lean on what we call localities. Within each state, you have local governments, and there's a power balance between states and local governments. So in such a way, part of your authority is given locally. So if you think about here, the most powerful local entity in our area is Killeen Independent School District. You pay taxes to Killeen ISD, and they construct a large amount of power and influence over this area. People don't realize that. More than the city of Killeen, more than the city of Harker Heights, Killeen ISD is the most powerful local agency that really organizes how things move in this area. And that happens underneath the purview of the federal, the state, and local, but it in and of itself is a separate agreement that carries a lot of local control. So you can go to board meetings and you can vote board members in or out. You could vote on curriculum ideas and standards and whatnot. That happens here. So we have this last little bit of power that we give up to no one. We reserve that. That's ours. That's where we remain perfectly autonomous in our own being. That's the power we don't have to surrender to the group. That's the power we hold on to. And so in such a way, what the Founding Fathers are trying to do is you're trying to create a balanced system where you can simultaneously uphold an autonomous identity, but then still be members of dynamic groupings. The farther the grouping goes up, the less involvement you have. So what you have is you're very involved and meaningful in your local government. You're less involved, less meaningful in the state government, and you're hardly not involved at all in the federal government. That's the way it was designed. So in reality, most people in the early governments, you wouldn't mess with the federal government. They didn't have a whole lot of power, right? I'm going to show you that in class. They had pretty much two things that they were supposed to do, right? And I'm a fan of that, actually, right? So when people ask me, like, Crosby, you sound anti-government. You sound like anti-federal government. No, I'm not anti-government. Government is necessary. Government can be good. But everything must remain in a balance. That's what we were trying to secure. So when people talk about a states' rights argument, that's a legitimate argument. It is not by accident that the federal government champions the idea that we fought a civil war over slavery and states' rights is always about the suppression of people. Because if you can get people to turn on their own states, who then takes the power we gave to the states? Who wins that debate? The people didn't hold on to it. The federal government consumed the power we denied to the states. We have to reasonably conclude that there's something bigger going on here, right? And the federal government is pulling towards a Hobbesian narrative, right? Or a Rousseauan narrative, depending on, are you going to let the king or the Rousseauan mob control, right? And in reality, what our founding fathers did is if we set up the system of federalism and pit all platforms against each other, then what it does is it gives us enough unification to have consistency and stability, but not so much required conformity that's going to produce rebellion. As parents, I often tell parents, like, well, how do you create a stable home? Right? I'll give you this. You control very little, and you guarantee that your child has some area of autonomy. So my children's rooms, it's their room. It's not my room. It's not mine. It's not my thing. It's their room. Do they have to clean their room? No. I don't make them clean their room. The only time I get onto the room is if there's something detrimental to the house. So there's like piles of dirty laundry that are wet and it's causing mold. Now we have a problem because the problem extends beyond just their mess. Now it's impacting the house. Bathroom towels have been a big issue. They just throw the wet towels over and then mold. I'm like, no, that's not okay. But I only step in to the extent that it begins to impact the household. Other than that, my kids, it's bothered my mother-in-law. They're like, you should like dress your kids, like dress them up. I'm like, my kids whatever they want. As long as they're decent and covered, I don't care. Yeah, but she's like wearing like 2 different socks. So, my youngest daughter, like her whole elementary school career has just been the most radical, outlandish outfits. I mean, she'll come down with like some sweatpants underneath the skirt, and then like it was like, all right, rock and roll, right? You probably haven't noticed, but I wear always mismatched socks. I don't match my socks. I don't waste the time matching my socks, and they're always kind of crazy and whatnot. And I'm like, yeah, you know, this is what I do. Almost every one of my kids has picked up on that. I was surprised when my son went to junior high with mismatched socks on and shorts. Dude, that'd get me beat up 20 years ago. And he's like, I like it. I'm like, hey, you be you. Guys, to be an effective nation, there's got to be a platform where you be you. But you can't be you always. Because if you are you always, and there is no required sacrifice, then there's no group that you're really involved in. And if you're not required to sacrifice to the group, then you're effectively going to feel alienated and outside and isolated. This is what we're trying to do. This is not easy. You kind of asked me earlier about Locke going up. I think the problem we have with political philosophy is Rousseau is easier. Just let the group decide. Whatever the group wants, we'll just do that. Whatever. So the group just, and it's easy. Rousseau gives us an easy solution. Y'all just decide. Or Hobbes gives us an easy solution. Your dad, you decide. Locke does not. If I'm going to father as a Lockean, it means a lot of sit down, a lot of conversation, a lot of, okay, where's the middle ground? Where does this need to be? It's endless conversation. Guys, the thing that we should expect from the federal government the most is civil conversation. They shouldn't be getting a whole lot of that ever. We should expect civil conversation. That's the system. That's the way it is decided. So we have a res publica. Res meaning thing, publica meaning the public. So the best way to understand the government is this. Because people are like, well, it's like a democracy. No, remember, democracy is everything go to the people have absolute control. We have res publica, which is a republic, a thing consented to by the public, but you don't have direct control over it. So what does that mean? The best example is a clock. Einstein once said, time is merely a persistent illusion. How much of your life is organized by time? You came here today at 8 o'clock, why? Time. Time. Time gives us a valuable organizational metric by which we can do what? Manage the collective. When you're on your own, you're not really confined by time. It's other people's agenda and the collective that benefits from time. Guys, who created time? We did. It's not even accurate. Do you know the average day is not 24 hours? It's 24 hours and some change, give or take, based on the rotational cycle of the Earth. You can actually look this up. The actual technical time is not. A year is not exactly 365 days. It's not even 365 and a fourth of a day. It's messy. Like, we're trying to build abstract conceptions from things we didn't really know. So time is kind of our best guess at a universal truth. But notice that our best guess at a universal truth is something we organize our life by. Why? Because we conceive of the benefit of the collective value of time. It's a public thing. We created it, and then we organize our life by its dictates because we perceive of the benefit value to everybody. Could time work if we were just democratic about it? Let's just have a vote now. You don't have to, if you feel like it's 8 o'clock, you just show up in the afternoon and you feel like it's 8 o'clock. Would that ever work? No. I failed the class, but I feel like I passed. Does that work? See what I'm saying? Like there's evidence of, there's things that we hold in the collective that we perceive the value that organization, that construct provides for the collective. And I think that's important for us to understand. Because if we look at time isn't something that we're going and messing with. You don't get the opportunity to decide your own time. but you still have organized your life accordingly because of the positive benefit it provides to the collective. What happens when time goes askew? What happens when the clocks go off? What happens when it doesn't really happen anymore, but back before cell phones and all that, when there's a lightning strike and all the electricity went out, all your clocks went out, you're like, it was like a point of panic, right? It's like, oh, what time is it? Now we have satellite time and a bunch of other stuff. So we have, it says first, there are two considerations to get back to the federal system of government. What are we trying to do here? There's something unique about what we're doing in America. It says, which places that system in a very interesting point of view. One of the things we have to conceive is that America is trying to do something that has not yet been done. The government we have is unique. It is different. Not the government of the Articles of Confederation. That's been done a lot. We had that a lot. We had that in the ancient Greek city-states, and it didn't work then either. What we have here is this. In a single republic, all power surrendered by the people is submitted to the administration of the single government, and usurpations are guarded against by the division of government into distinct powers. So if we had a single republic, the people would basically build one government and surrender power to that government. However, in a compound Republic of America, the power surrendered by the people is first divided between two different distinct forms of government. So the first thing we did is you don't give up your power to one government, you give up your power to two distinct forms of government, and then the portion of power to each subdivided among distinct and separate departments. We'll dive into this next week. This is where you get your three branches of government, legislative, executive, and judiciary. You also have three branches of government in every state level, legislative, executive, and judiciary. So what I'm trying to do is, because I've divided this power in such a way, I create a double security to the rights of the people to guarantee the government that you gave power to doesn't exercise more power than you gave it. Because at the end of the day, I have to concede. Just like a child's greatest threat is their parent, a citizen's greatest threat is their government. The United States government is a greater risk to you than Russia. We once understood that. We don't anymore. So we have to put in restraints, institutional restraints, that keeps the power we gave it in the right place. He says, second, it is of great importance in a republic not only to guard against society against the oppression of its rulers, but also to guard one part of society against the injustice of the other part. Different interests necessarily exist in different classes of citizens. If a majority be united by a common interest, the rights of the minority will be insecure. In other words, we're going to build a nation that simultaneously protects you from an absolute controlling government, but also protects you from a self-interested combination of the majority or the mob, which may seek to use government power to infringe your rights. I'm out of time. I'll see you on the flip side Monday. We'll wrap Unit 1, and then we'll move on